Hello, my name is Galen McKinley. I'm a professor of Earth and Environmental Sciences at Columbia University and at Lamont Doherty Earth Observatory. I'm here to tell you about my educational and professional path and also to tell you about one recent research project that I've done. So to begin with, my path through science started with my education in civil engineering at Rice University, and then I went on to get a PhD in climate at MIT. My path in STEM started with thinking about how do we build things for the use of humans. And then as I started doing that, I started asking the question, why more? Why does the world look the way it does? And that led me to studying climate and climate change. So now at Columbia, I run a research group where we study the ocean carbon cycle, the ocean circulation, and its relationship to climate. So why are we interested in the ocean carbon sink? The main reason is because the ocean is so important to understanding climate change and to modulating climate change. So here are the cumulative carbon sources and sinks of carbon all the way back to 1765, the pre-industrial period. And we see that the sources of carbon on the left here are predominantly fossil fuels, as I think most of us are well aware. Only a small amount of the carbon that's gone into the atmosphere has actually been from the land. And we look at the sinks, there's a more even distribution. Not all the carbon has stayed in the atmosphere. Quite a bit of it, in fact, about 40% has been absorbed by the ocean. And so the ocean is modulating climate change by taking up carbon. And this future behavior of the ocean carbon sink is really critical to how much climate change is going to happen in the future. The data we have to understand the ocean carbon sink are quite sparse. Using ship tracks from research and volunteer commercial ships, we do have data for the past several decades of the ocean carbon content in the surface ocean. But if we look at any one month, the data are actually quite sparse. Here's June 2016 as an example. And so just in the past 5 years, with the advent of new data science techniques, people have figured out how to do better interpolations to take these sparse monthly data and cover the global ocean so that we can understand the total ocean effect on the carbon sink. Many people have done this, and here is just some of the recent results. And I've taken 5 of these observationally based estimates, and they're different because the data are quite sparse, and so the interpolation approaches are somewhat different. But when we average them together, we get this picture of what the ocean carbon sink has been doing in the last several decades. In the early 1990s, the ocean carbon sink was quite strong. Then the ocean carbon sink slowed down over the decade of the 90s, and then it recovered. And we'd really like to understand what drove this behavior because we'd like to be able to better predict what's going to happen in the future. The other way we can learn about global ocean carbon fluxes is to use computer simulations. So these represent the circulation, chemistry, and biology of the ocean and allow us to estimate air-sea carbon fluxes. And when I compare the results of 6 of these different models to my observationally based products, I see that they compare quite well, showing quite similar patterns of variability. And the patterns of variability here led me to ask the question of whether I could explain some of these wiggles by factors in the climate system that are actually not internal to the ocean, but that are external to the ocean, happening in the atmosphere. Because some of the wiggles in this time series to me look like events that I'm aware of that have happened, such as, for example, the variability in the atmospheric CO2 growth rate and the fact that we've had large volcanoes erupting, such as Mount Pinatubo in 1991. So I said, well, what if I did a back of the envelope calculation? And so that led me to a theoretical model where we have a simple differential equation where we represent the overturning circulation of the ocean here, and air-sea gas exchange that's affected both by the atmospheric CO2 concentration as well as by the temperature of the ocean in this parameter S, which is the solubility. And I'm asking here, can my theoretical model, could the magnitude of the changes that have happened in atmospheric growth rate and in the temperature of the ocean be enough to drive variability in the CO2 sink? And does it look like what we're seeing in the data and in the models? So here is the data that I forced that model with: realistic atmospheric CO2 growth rate, where I see a slowdown in that growth rate in the 1990s and a recovery after, and temperature anomalies that occurred in the surface temperature of the ocean with these large volcanoes that erupted, El Chichon in 82 and Mount Pinatubo in 91 specifically. And what certainly surprised me enormously when I first saw it is that the magnitude of the response in my theoretical model is actually quite the same as occurs in the interpolated data in blue and in these hindcast ocean models in green. We see this large increase in the ocean carbon sink in 1991 when Pinatubo erupts and cools the ocean, a slowdown in the sink over the 1990s that's largely explained by the fact that the atmospheric growth rate was slow in that decade, and then a recovery after 2000 when the atmospheric CO2 growth rate begins to get larger again after about the year 2000. So thus we conclude in this paper that we just published in AGU Advances this year that the dominant drivers of ocean carbon sink variability have in fact been external to the ocean in recent decades. And those two drivers are the growth rate of atmospheric CO2 and the global temperature anomalies from large volcanoes. So I'll close just by saying thanks for being here to learn about me, my path through science, and about my research on the ocean carbon sink here at Columbia University and Lamont Doherty Earth Observatory.